Good afternoon. My name is Christine Cody, and I'll be the moderator for today's community classroom. This series is brought to you through a partnership by the Washington State University Tri-Cities Mosaic Center for Student Inclusion, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and the Office of Academic Affairs. We are thrilled to have so many of you join us today, and we hope that this webinar is a space and a means for you to learn and engage around the topics of race, equity, and engaged citizenship. The overarching goal for the community classroom model is to provide accessible resources and opportunities to talk about today's social issues. We're so pleased to have WSU Tri-Cities faculty, Dr. Bauman and Robert Franklin, as well as community leaders Reka Robinson, Daishaundra Loving-Hearne, and Naima Chambers Smith join us for today's event. Before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please take note that there is a question and answer feature for today's webinar. You are welcome to post questions within the question and answer feature. However, we do have a designated time frame towards the end of the event for us to respond to questions. It is not likely that we'll be able to address every question, so we do have some back-end moderators who will pre-select questions based on those that best align with today's topic regarding the history of the civil rights in the Tri-Cities past to present. If you are a WSU student who is engaged with the common reading, we just want you to make note that the link for you to confirm your participation will be pasted in the chat, which is different than the Q&A feature, towards the end of the event. Friends, this is an invitation for us as a campus and a community to come together and to envision a better and more just future for the Tri-Cities and beyond. We invite you to come with an open heart and mind, ready to learn side by side, and posture to ask questions out of curiosity and goodwill for being a part of the solution. And with that, I would love to introduce our first speakers, Dr. Robert Bauman and Robert Franklin, who are, as I mentioned, WSU Tri-Cities faculty. They will kick us off. If the two of you could please provide just a brief introduction for yourselves and then lead into the overview of the history of the civil rights.
Sure, happy to do that, Christine. First of all, Christine, thank you very much for inviting us to be a part of this presentation. We're honored to be part of this panel today. So just very briefly, I'm a history professor at WSU Tri-Cities. I won't say how long I've been there because that'll give away my age, but quite a while now. And I first started doing some research on the history of race and civil rights in the Tri-Cities over 20 years ago. And over time, continued to do more. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, Robert Franklin joined the Hanford History Project. And I'll let him talk introduce himself and talk about the Hanford History Project's role in this.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So I've been at WSU Tri-Cities since 2015. I first joined as the assistant director of the Hanford History Project, which is dedicated to preserving the artifact and archive history of the Hanford site. In 2017, we were contacted by the National Park Service because of our experience with oral histories. We've run an oral history program actually since before the Hanford History Project. Dr. Bauman helped start that oral history program back in 2012 that interviewed workers and people associated with the Hanford site I took over that program in 2016, and in 2017 we were asked to help with a civil rights grant to document. The title of the grant was Documenting African American Segregation, Migration, and Civil Rights at the Hanford unit of the park in Tri-Cities. And so we immediately reached out to the Access group in Pasco, the African American Community Cultural Educational Society, in help finding interviewees. We conducted 38 interviews for that project, a total, which was gathering and digitizing 12 interviews that that group had, and then 28 of our own, or 26 of our own. And then Bob and I have also been working on a volume coming out through WSU Press about examining the history of race and diversity within the Tri-Cities from multiple perspectives, with a couple other co-authors. That's going to be out this November.
Yeah, and so in our time today, Robert and I are going to highlight, try to do a brief background on the history of segregation in the Tri-Cities, and highlight a few episodes of civil rights demonstrations and protests in the Tri-Cities in the past. And so I don't know if, Robert, you want to start our PowerPoint?
Sure thing. Okay.
Slides.
Okay. So I guess I already covered some of this, but this was some of the material that we used to try to gather interviewees. Like I said, interviews took place in 2018 into 2019, a little bit in 2019, and then we've kind of been working with the material we generated since then for this volume that's coming out and in other presentations. But this really built off the work that the Access group had done about 20 years earlier to interview folks that had come here in the Manhattan Project era. The interviews that I did largely more focused on the 50s and 60s, so kind of the post-war into the civil rights. This still a part of this Great Migration, but a little after the Hanford site itself. So of course, the Manhattan Project and its 3 sites, Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and here at Hanford, drew hundreds of thousands of laborers from all across the United States. At the Hanford site, a town of 50,000 sprung up almost overnight in 1943, middle of 1943, in the old Hanford Township. And because this was a federal defense project, the DuPont Corporation, which was the company in charge of building the Hanford site, was tasked with recruiting a certain number of African American laborers in order to comply with defense contract provisions. And so about 10 to 15% of the Hanford workforce were African American laborers, drawn mostly from the South, almost exclusively from the South, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, etc. And these men and women were recruited mostly for unskilled labor positions as either basic construction workers, if they were men, or cooks. And then women were recruited mostly as domestic servant or domestic laborers, and to work in also in food service. One kind of bright spot in that is that pay. That even though the jobs were not equal to race, the pay was equal. The pay was the same for Black and white workers, and for some of the people that we interviewed, the pay at the Hanford, working at Hanford, was sometimes on the order of 3 to 7 times what they could make per week in the South. So this was some real spending power for many of these people, and the word of mouth of the pay at Hanford drew kind of a chain migration over time of many African Americans from the South to the North, especially specifically to Hanford. The last thing I'll say about the construction camp is that this camp was segregated by, the jobs are segregated by race, job crews are segregated by race, as were the barracks and the mess halls were both segregated by race and by gender. the only thing that was not segregated was the baseball league, which kind of flew in the face of National League segregation at that time.
Yeah, and Robert's absolutely right. The pay rate was so much higher than in the South. That's really what drew thousands and thousands of African Americans here, and family migrations. Numbers of people from the same towns in East Texas, for instance, Kildare, Texas, was one of those places. And so you had a significant migration of African Americans during World War II, and as Robert pointed out, immediately the construction of a system of segregation, both on the site itself, and that was a combination of the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers was in charge of construction site, and the DuPont Corporation, but then also in the communities. So to give you just a quick sense of what that was like, the town of Richland became a government town run by the federal government essentially, and you could only live in Richland if you were a permanent employee of the Hanford site. And African Americans were excluded from being permanent employees. So through that logic, then African Americans could not live in the town of Richland. African Americans were completely excluded from the city of Kennewick. Kennewick had racially restricted covenants in place that prohibited non-whites from living anywhere in the city. And those covenants lasted well into the 1960s. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then in Pasco, African Americans were allowed to live only east of the railroad tracks in East Pasco. And so there were very quickly a system of segregation in terms of housing put in place in the communities. Also many establishments, eating establishments, taverns, all sorts of businesses, shops, many of them in the towns prohibited African Americans from shopping there or eating there as well.
Yeah, and to kind of build off on what Bob said, and I'll advance it to another picture. Pasco and Kennewick city leaders, Richland was government controlled, and so it would always, and Richland after the war did allow a few African Americans to get permanent positions, not scientific positions, but permanent laborer positions, and they could live there. But Kennewick and Pasco were very adamant about where African Americans could be in their town. Kennewick obviously thought of itself as lily white, and Pasco wanting to restrict people to the east side of the tracks, or on a couple of occasions, definitely east of 4th Street. And there was, and Pasco city leaders were very adamant about this. In fact, when DuPont came to talk about bringing in thousands of African Americans, city leaders made DuPont promise that it would furnish them all with return tickets. None of them would be allowed to stay. This didn't happen, largely as DuPont never followed through on that promise, but also the Hanford construction ended in early 1945. And so many people had moved on to seek war work elsewhere. But the expansion of Hanford during the Cold War drew many more thousands of African Americans back to this area, both to work on the dams, but also to Hanford. The Pasco city leaders were very concerned about this, what they considered to be kind of like an invasion, and I think that's what their perspective would have been like, and wanted to draw strict racial boundaries in their city. And so African Americans were relegated to East Pasco, which was, to put it bluntly, a ghetto, a shanty town area with no paved streets, no sidewalks, no street lights, no sewer system, well into the early 1960s, and with housing that was laughably substandard, especially when you compare kind of the new model housing of the town of Richland and its alphabet homes. Much of the housing in East Pasco was shacks put together with spare materials, old automobile trailers. Most of it lacked electricity. Wood stoves were common. Really, many conditions that African Americans would have many of those that escaped the South, left the South because of the poor conditions on sharecrops, found those conditions in East Pasco.
Right, and one of the key differences then the second wave of migration was this was getting much more permanent way because of the Cold War kept going on. The jobs stayed, whereas after World War II, a lot of the people who migrated here for jobs left after the war. People who came during this Cold War wave of migration were going to stay. And that's when we'll get to some of the incidents of civil rights protests.
It's kind of hard to, right above these boys next to the light there, you can make out that this, there's a sign here, and these signs popped up in World War II and after, a "We cater to white trade only," somewhere along on a tavern somewhere between where Pasco and Richland is today, on the where Columbia Park is now, pre-flood. And so these signs popped up, but also there was interviewees mentioned just unspoken or kind of unspoken racial animus, racial hostility. For example, African Americans were welcome to shop in clothing stores in Kennewick, but they could not try on clothes. They could have jobs in Kennewick, but they had to leave by nightfall, and anyone crossing the bridge would be stopped by police, asking them what their purpose was in Kennewick. And so same thing, eateries. There's a very famous court case from the Pasco Greyhound bus station that involved Hazel Scott, a very famous singer of the era, where she was refused service at the counter and told that she had to take her food to go. So these things that we often associate with the Jim Crow South were very alive and well here in the Inland Northwest.
Right, and you'd often see advertisements in local newspapers for restaurants, and at the bottom of the ad it would say "We cater to white trade only." So it was very prevalent segregation throughout the Tri-Cities during this period.
And at this time, relations with police became pretty hostile between police and the African American community, and the Pasco Police Department even invented a crime called investigation, which they would use to arrest and detain, usually just overnight, African Americans that they suspected of committing crimes or wanted just to get off the street or to intimidate them. And so they would use this crime of investigation to legally detain people for what otherwise they would have had no legal recourse to do so. So we have a couple clips here. This first one is James Pruitt. James Pruitt came here in 1948 to work as a young man. He's going to talk about what kind of his first impressions of this area.
And I was working in Los Angeles, and he asked me if I wanted to make some money to come up to Richland, Washington. Mm-hmm. So I decided to come up here, and I stayed up here for 6 months. And the dust and the tumbleweeds were so bad, I left, went back to Los Angeles, and stayed 3 months. Okay. And I came back, and I've been here ever since.
Okay. Jim, let's talk about the social environment in the Tri-City area. You know, again, Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, for the African American. At that time, 1948, what was the relationship between the African American and the, we'll say, the white community or majority community at that time?
Bad. Very prejudiced, very racist. And I was surprised when I came here to find a place that I had left a few years back from Mississippi, and came here and found the same thing that I found in Mississippi. Mm-hmm.
This next clip is from Virginia Crippen. Virginia had moved here to open up a restaurant because she had heard through a family network that there was almost no place for African Americans to eat. She owned a very popular restaurant called Virgie's Chicken Shack in East Pasco. Its real name was Virginia's, but everybody called it Virgie's.
Well, that was out of the question. We couldn't even eat at the bus station. We couldn't eat at Payless. We couldn't eat no place in downtown Pasco. that white owned. And that's the only place they had places to eat that I know about was downtown.
How about
And we
clothing?
couldn't go to any of those.
How about shopping for clothing
Oh
or
yes,
groceries?
you could go in all the grocery stores and dress shops and all, spend your money. And they treat you nice, you know, you spending your money.
So just.
But you better not go to the bank and ask to borrow some money. You could put money in the bank, but you sure couldn't borrow money. Well,
Okay. Bob, you want to take this one?
I'm thinking given the time, we might want to go ahead and move on to the.
No problem. Okay. Okay, why don't you take this one?
All right. So in May of 1963, literally at almost the same time that there were demonstrations happening in Birmingham, Alabama, there was a civil rights protest and march in Kennewick, protesting the ongoing segregation there. And this was a protest, a march that was a long time in planning, and it involved the local chapter of the NAACP. It involved bringing in also some members of NAACP from the West Side, from Portland and Seattle. It involved also the local chapter of another civil rights organization called the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. And NAACP and CORE were both very active here locally in the 1950s and 60s and beyond. And so there was march up and down the downtown Kennewick. And here's a photo of the march. And you notice signs that say, you know, why is Kennewick all white? Because it was still at that time all white. And so this was a protest directly aimed at the segregationist policies in the city of Kennewick, both especially in terms of living, right, but segregation in most aspects of life. And importantly, also women were very involved in this protest and involved in both the NAACP and CORE, those organizations, in planning this protest and in helping carry out this march as well. Jack Tanner, who was an attorney who later would become a federal judge, you know, in talking about this march, labeled Kennewick the Birmingham of Washington. And it really resonated, of course, with people at the time, because this was happening literally at almost exactly the same time that there were demonstrations and protests in Birmingham, Alabama about segregation there.
Yeah. Protests continued on through the 1960s. We've highlighted two here, the one that Bob just mentioned in 1969. And there were others across what's now the Blue Bridge, also in downtown Pasco. But there's one notable one in 1969 that had turned violent. And this was a protest over policing in East Pasco. The police had been accused of, like in many other urban areas and all throughout the South, of intimidation of Black residents, of intimidating them often with the shotguns they kept in the trunks of their cars. This protest was sparked when an officer had, in making arrest, had used a nightstick to strike an innocent girl that was standing by a suspect. And a mob, mostly white mob, had converged in Franklin at the Franklin County Courthouse and was arrived with weapons and was threatening violence. Here, James Pruitt, who at this time was a core member of Congress on Racial Equality and had been a past president, saw that he needed to defuse the situation. So I'll play this clip.
Way, those kids was out there fixing to get destroyed because they come to destroy the police department. They turn over police cars and stuff up there in the street, burn down the trees in front of the courthouse. And they had Reverend Allen, Reverend Allen, he didn't come, but Reverend Vaughns, Wayne Jackson, Nat Jackson, and myself, and everybody spoke to those young people. And I got on the wishing well, and I cried like a baby, because I seen what was going to happen. If those kids had to pull up them guns out there and start shooting at them police, they were going to destroy them. And these was all white kids. And I got on the wishing well, and I promised them if they would just think about it, because they were going to get destroyed, and go back home and think about it. I said, as long as there's blood in this body, I will never let this happen again in this town.
And after this incident, the city of Pasco hired James Pruitt to be its first Black employee in the Police and Public Relations Department, where he formed a panel to oversee cases of racial bias in policing, and was actually able to get the police department to take the shotguns out of cars. That was one of the first things that he did. And so he, you know, this protest did help end up spurring a little bit of change within relations between police and the majority Black community in Pasco. And so, Bob, is there anything you want to say before we kind of end?
No, I think you go ahead and just show this last clip from Dallas.
Okay, so this last clip is from Dallas Barnes, and this kind of sums up Dallas's feelings on the civil rights efforts here, and kind of where they've come, and maybe what still needs to be done.
I don't think Hanford, as Hanford, because everything is so diversified now, is doing anything. You know, I don't even think that you can even point to a minority community as such, a Black community. I don't think you could do that. I don't even think you can say there is an East Pasco anymore that's predominantly Black. Yeah. In fact, I know you can't. You can't do that. And if you're going to say the Black have been absorbed in the community, and then you can't say that that's the case, because we don't see their physical presence in your classroom on this campus, or you know, distributed through the mainstream or business community that you would expect haven't come through all of that. So, in terms of what Hanford did, I think Hanford made an effort doing this day, but I think Hanford's efforts with Blacks is just like their efforts with the reactors out there. They're decommissioned. So.
Okay. And that concludes our historical presentation.
All right, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take any at the end of the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob and Robert, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. We appreciate it, and thank you for the work that you've done to preserve our local history as well. We're going to go ahead and transition to our panel with Reka, Daishaundra, and Naima. And I'm going to just start us right off so we can have as much time as possible. The first question is, can you share a bit about yourself and what activism has looked like for you over the past 6 months?
Are you wanting anyone in particular to start?
You go ahead, Naima.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'm a wife and a mother of 2 boys. I have over 20 years of law enforcement experience. I currently work for the Department of Corrections in Oregon as one of the security threat management lieutenants. I also provide independent training and consulting to outside agencies. I'm the founder and CEO of the Tri-Cities Diversity and Inclusion Council, and was recently appointed to serve as one of the commissioners on the City of Pasco's Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Commission. And in addition to that, I'm a member of several local community organizations like Access and Racial Equity, Social Justice. But in regards to activism, I would say that it's looked busy. I feel like my activism and advocacy have been interchangeable in many ways, and probably looks different than most would expect. While I participated in a couple of the Black Lives Matter marches and spoken in a few events on civic responsibility and the efforts that we can make as individuals to support change, my efforts and the council's efforts have been primarily focused on advocating for and supporting communities of color, as well as promoting unity. A few months ago, a friend and I were able to bring several Black-led community organizations and individuals together virtually with the primary focus of advocating for the Black community. And we're calling ourselves the Tri-Cities Collective Black Voice. Both Day and Reka are part of the collective. And in addition to that, let's see, I've served on the Tri-Cities Mutual Aid and Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network's approval committee in allocating funds to members of the BIPOC community that have been affected by COVID. Organized a few events to support food insecurities and provide youth in need with backpacks and school supplies. The Black Lives Matter Coalition here in the Tri-Cities have also been a part of that event as well. And that was in collaboration with the Links and Access and other community organizations. And under Tri-Cities Diversity and Inclusion Council, I've developed a collaboration with Gemini Corps to provide DEI consulting to local government agencies and businesses. Our most recent client is the Pasco School District, who's actively adopting an equity plan to support the youth and staff in their district. Right now, I'm doing what I can virtually to advocate, educate, and support communities of color under Tri-Cities Diversity and Inclusion Council. We actually have 2 upcoming events that Day and Reka are also part of, which is we're going to be hosting a race series on Facebook, and they are part of the first panel where we'll have a discussion between both the Black and the Latino community where we discuss race, division, and ideas to support unity. And they are also supporting our event and Keep Your Crown On, which is an event to support the psychological safety of our Black youth and provide them coping skills to aid in resiliency. And that's basically it.
I guess I'll go. I didn't know we were all gonna wear red lips, Naima and Day, yay. That's right, we are triplets. I feel like we're attached at the hip in a lot of the things that we do. But my name is Reka Robinson, formerly the morning show host on Power 99.1. I have since stepped down doing some part-time work, so you will still hear my voice on Power 99.1, but I'm really focused in my business, which is Just Me Reka Inspires. Under that umbrella is my motivational speaking. And then of course I have Single You, which is my life coaching business where I help women discover their worth so that they can stop tying their identity to men. And I have recently added, I guess, an activism. I don't even call it that. I'm just somebody who wants to speak truth. I am just somebody who wants to help people who feel that they are uneducated in this realm of racism and voting. And if I can be a bridge for you to get over that hump of, oh my God, this is like super overwhelming, because it is, then I will be that. And with that, because I do have my platform on Power 99.1, I did start something right after George Floyd was murdered right in front of us on Power 99.1, and I called it the Race Series. And I had a lot of conversations with people like a police officer. Shout out to Officer Pruneda, who was on the police force in Pasco. I also had a conversation with a lawyer, Vito de la Cruz, who is very, very, very educated in that lane of police brutality and what's going on between us, the citizens, and the police officers. And I had a lot of those conversations going on. And then Day and I decided to do some voter education events where we were getting people registered to vote. And then we had a heart to really speak to the age group of 18 to about 27 and reach out to them. And again, be the bridge from, I believe my vote doesn't matter, I don't know how to vote, I was never educated on this, to now you believe your vote does matter because it does. Now you're educated. And so hopefully in November, you will vote the whole ballot. You will vote the whole ticket. So those are some of the things that I'm doing to help push the agenda of we all need to be involved forward. Day.
Okay, my name is Daishaundra. I am a co-CEO of Urban Poet Society, as well as, like Naima mentioned, a member of the collective Black Voice, and I am a founder of the Black Lives Matter Coalition, where we are striving to bring more equity, equality, and education to the Black community on top of the many protests that we've had since the death of George Floyd to bring awareness to the struggles with systemic racism and oppression in the Tri-Cities and all over America. We've had many food drives and backpack giveaways, as Naima mentioned, with her and Reka and Power 99, and we will be doing a lot more things of that nature. Right now, we're working pretty closely with Michelle Whitney at the Pasco School District on an education initiative, which will hopefully bring forward changes, major changes in our history curriculums. We are, like Reka mentioned, working on a voter education event every Thursday in October to educate everyone on the candidates that are running for office. And I'm working with the Tri-Cities Diversity and Inclusion Council on a mental wellness event series. And all of these things are coming soon. So I hope you guys check them all out.
Thank you all for sharing about the many, many things that you're doing in our community. I think it's so important for people to just get a sense, to get a snapshot of the many projects and initiatives that you are spearheading. So the next question, kind of tying into Bob and Robert's presentation, is, can you share any family stories as it regards to the history of the civil rights movement in the Tri-Cities, or where you grew up? What are you proud of and what has brought pain?
I'll go first since I'm last. My grandfather on my father's side actually marched with Martin Luther King. So that is something that I'm extremely proud of, to have somebody in my life that works so closely in the civil rights movement, somebody that I can look up to. And then of course I have my family here in the Tri-Cities that actually just recently told me a lot of what we learned today about the shacks on the east side, and more information about the Hanford Project and how that racism and discrimination affected them personally, which is always painful, right? So everything that we do during this unrest is painful. It's painful to watch Breonna Taylor not have justice. It's painful to watch the outcry for George Floyd. A lot of this is painful, and something that's predominantly painful to me is our own community. There's this giant system of gaslighting that happens to a lot of us, where we experience a lot of this racism and oppression and things that happen to us. And a lot of people will say that it doesn't exist and it's not here. But as we saw today in our history lesson, it is here, and it has been here before, and it does exist. So those things are very painful, but I am proud that here in the Tri-Cities, so many of us have risen up to come together to give back to our own communities and to stand up for what's right. I'm proud that for the first time in history, all 50 states rose up after the death of George Floyd to stand for Black people and civil rights. I am proud of that. So as much as there are bad things, there are good things happening, and I'm very proud of all of those things.
All right, yeah, the painful thing is definitely people not listening to us or thinking that they speak for us. I mean, it lives in the comments under our news station's Facebook page. Every time they post a story, you see the angry and visceral and just, it doesn't exist, you guys are race baiting, you're doing this, da 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 da, because the signs, yes, were taken down. Yes, I'm a Black woman who lives in Kennewick. However, it doesn't mean that that isn't still happening. Some of your family members did something to you 15 years ago you can't even forgive. So of course, something like this is still bubbling under the surface. And of course, we are trying to fix it. And one of the things that I'm proud of is having a school named after my grandmother, which is Reka Robinson Elementary School in Pasco. And I would like to speak on some of the things that she has done, which is so weird because I was 10 when she got sick, and then she later passed away after that. But so of course I wasn't there, right? Like I was there, but I don't remember, and I wasn't there for the whole journey. So there's a lot of things that I just didn't know until as I got older and I started asking questions and stuff. And so it's really cool to see how many awards that my grandmother was given because of the work that she did. And some of the work that she did, my dad actually sent me some old newspaper clippings, and I'm like, oh my God, look at my grandma. But she started volunteering, and she was quoted saying, volunteering, I just stepped in and helped. She literally said that, like volunteering wasn't a thing. You just step in and help. And with all of the help that she was doing in the community, it led her to being hired as a home liaison for the Pasco School District. So what does that mean? That means she was the attendance supervisor. That's what they called it. So if Day wasn't going to school, she would come knock on Day's door and say, why are you not in school? What's going on? And then that child would then tell her what's going on, and my grandmother would help whether it was money, they needed food. I remember some lady even telling me, man, your grandma used to drop off lice shampoo at my house all the time because we couldn't get rid of it. We couldn't figure it out. So then she bought us bed sheets. And so it wasn't just, why are you not at school? It was, okay, what's going on? And then she would help you fix the issue to get you to go to school, because she was very adamant about people going to school in the Black. And of course, she lived in East Pasco because she wasn't allowed to live in Richland or Kennewick at that time. And it's funny because I remember buying my house right here that's in Kennewick. And my dad was like, woo, your grandma rolling over in her grave. You know, she wants to live in Pasco. And I just felt like, you know what? They can't stop me. So I love that I own a house on soil where my grandmother literally was not allowed to live. And then when my father lived here, who graduated from Pasco High in 1970, there were signs that said, Negroes cannot be here after dark. And that was here. It's like, you know, people think, oh, that was so, it was 1920s. It was that. It's 2020 and it's still happening because, again, it's bubbling under the surface. And just because you don't see the signs doesn't mean that it's not happening. So those are a lot of things that my grandma did to get the school, not really to get to school, the school named after her, because I want to word that different, because it's not like she asked for it. Actually, my dad volunteered her name, and the school was actually school number 11, and they didn't have a name for it yet. My dad actually wrote a letter and said that, can you please, you know, we want to nominate our mother Virgie, and they accepted, and they named the school after her. So it's really cool to be in a town doing the same things that my grandma did. You know, who gets that? Who gets a school named after a relative? So, Naima?
So I wasn't actually raised in the Tri-Cities. I'm from California. However, when I think of the civil rights movement and the struggles that Black people have endured to end segregation and racial discrimination, it's frustrating to me. And more than anything, it hurts knowing that we haven't progressed as far as many people like to say that we have. I think about two stories in particular that happened in Mississippi, and the first was around 1925, when a Black man purchased a refrigerator and he had fallen behind in his payments. And the owner of the store, who was a white man, came to the house one day to collect payment, and the Black man wasn't able to pay. And as a result, the store owner shot the Black man dead on his porch in front of his wife and children. And that Black man was my great-grandfather that was murdered. And the store owner was never convicted. He was never arrested. And then one other story that I think really sticks with me also is, if you fast forward to probably the early 1950s, two Black men hired by a white man to put up fence posts. And after they had completed the job and were ready to collect payment, the white man accused one of the Black men of eye raping his daughter because he looked at the daughter. And this resulted in a lynch mob coming after him, and the Freemasons having to smuggle him out of Mississippi by putting him in a wooden coffin and throwing the coffin into a train and sending him out to Chicago to save his life, basically. And that was my grandfather. So both of these stories, to me, closely parallel what we've seen today in regards to, in a lot of cases, white men being allowed to act as judge, jury, and executioner without consequences. And the stories that we hear in the media that coincide with that, it's disheartening. But when I think of something that I'm proud of, I will say that I am proud to be working alongside both Day and Reka, and doing this work to try to help better our community and advocate on behalf of our people.
Thanks for sharing those stories. It's so powerful to hear the stories that are rooted in our own community or who have impacted leaders within our community. What other life experiences do you bring that impact how you view and engage with advocacy and experience the local climate?
Guess I'll go first this time. So what other life experiences do I bring that impact how I view the local climate here? So my parents, well, my dad is from here. Again, he graduated from Pasco High, and then met and married my mom, who was from Seattle. I was born in 1983, but in 1986, my mom had had enough. She was from the city and she was like, it's time to go. They don't even have buses. And I thank them every day. Yeah, not every day, but a lot, for moving me out of here. I recently was in the midst of writing a grant to help the Pasco community, the BIPOC community here. And I had to research the percentages of Black people here. And the last video actually that Bob and Robert showed, when the guy said, you know, you can't say the Black people were swallowed up by the community, because they weren't. He's right, we're not here. We moved because you didn't want us, so bye. we'll go where we are wanted, not where we are tolerated. So a lot of those families left, including mine, right? And so when I was looking at the percentages, it was just disheartening, because I can't imagine being one of 1,000 kids in a school and that one is Black, because representation matters. And even for me, growing up in suburban America in Kent, Washington, I experienced a little bit of the same thing, but I came from a 2-parent household who taught me Black history. And I already knew about things like Lewis Lattimore, who is considered one of the 10 most important Black inventors. So, you know, the light bulb, everybody wants to talk about Thomas Edison, but they don't talk about Lewis Lattimore. He created the filament. So in order for you to actually turn on the light, that's important. But those are the things they're not going to teach us in school, right? It's all about Martin Luther King had a dream, he got shot. Okay. And that's disheartening for us when we look like him, to have to sit through that and look around and there's nobody else. So I thank my parents for giving me that experience. And then not only that, I left Kent, Washington and went all the way to Howard University in Washington, DC, which is a HBCU, which stands for Historically Black College and University. And those HBCUs were created because after we were not slaves anymore, we couldn't go to school. So there were a lot of people, white people like General Howard, who founded Howard University, so we could just go to school, just educate them, give them a chance. And so you took this little Black girl at 18 that grew up in a predominantly white community, sat her in the middle of DC, they call it Chocolate City, at least they did back then. And I got to see so many positive examples of Black people, doctors, lawyers. I was like, we can be anything? Oh my God. Because what the TV was showing me, what the media was showing me wasn't that. Especially being, again, in a community that didn't have a lot of representation, just my family and a few others, more than here in the Tri-Cities. And so the things that I'm working on with Day and Naima is to give the Black kids here those experiences, to push forward, to see, yo, I can be anything. I can be anything. I don't have to be an NFL player. I don't have to be an NBA player. I can be anything. And I'll end on this. T.D. Jakes said that Black people are not stupid. Black people have become everything that they showed us. Basketball players, baseball players, football players, every door they let us in, right? The problem is we are just underexposed. So we need to expose ourselves and then we can become anything else we want to be. And that is my mission, to bring that type of exposure to the BIPOC community here, so.
Okay, so I guess I'll go. For me, I believe there are several contributing factors that impact not only my worldview, but how I engage with the work. As mentioned, I was born and raised in California, which is a highly populated, diverse community where you will not only encounter people from different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, but people from all walks of life. I'm the eldest of 9 children, 7 of whom are still living. I also come from a multiracial, multicultural family, and we jokingly refer to ourselves as the United Nations because my maternal grandmother was full Japanese, born and raised in Japan. My youngest brother's half Mexican. My stepmother's Chinese and Jamaican. I have nieces and nephews that are Filipino, a cousin from Pakistan. I mean, I could go on and on, but I feel like it's the unique experience of being able to be raised in a family that celebrates the beauty and diversity while also being taught values that promote empathy, unity, contribution, and really an overall belief that we all deserve to be treated with love and respect. I don't know if it's because I'm the oldest child in my immediate family or from being like the oldest grandchild on my mom's side, but standing up for others and having my voice heard has always been, I feel like, one of my strengths, one of my superpowers. Not to mention my father instilled in each of his children that we're powerful and that we're capable beings. And It's this belief that, along with my core values, that give me perseverance and determination to advocate for both myself and others, and that's why I do it.
My life experiences, well, like Naima said, I'm a firstborn child, so that gives me leadership skills alone of 5. But I was born and raised here in the Tri-Cities, and my family migrated here from Kildare, Texas. So I was raised here in Pasco, Washington, with a family that was raising me basically, essentially, to be Southern. So I had a lot of different experiences with that. I had experiences here in the Tri-Cities in the school systems, experiencing racism and oppression that a lot of people would tell me didn't happen. And it wasn't until I went into my own community to talk about it that I was understood and those experiences were accepted. And so I think that alone gave me a very interesting perspective on what we're doing now, on top of the fact that when I was 19, I moved from the Tri-Cities to Atlanta, Georgia, which completely opened my eyes and came with so much self-discovery and education about our culture and what we've endured. So just to have that experience and upbringing from the South and here and from my family, all of those things together in culmination gave me the perspective that I have right now.
Okay, so our next question is, what would you say to people asking how they can help or who are looking to learn more?
Well, I'd say as a member of the community, your voice has power, and it's how you use that voice that determines the level of impact that you have in creating change. I personally want to urge everyone, if there are policies or barriers in place that you're not in agreement with, to number one, go out and vote, use your voice, vote. And I'm going to say that again, vote. But also review police policies, identify the gaps in those policies, create awareness about those gaps, and go to your local city council, go to your governor, go to your senator, go to all of your government representatives and make some noise, create some awareness, make your complaints heard. If you're a person of privilege, use your privilege as an advantage. We all have power, and it's how we choose to use it that will determine the impact, as I stated. I would also say seek to understand and learn by educating yourself, engaging with people outside your typical sphere of influence. Get involved with the community organizations whose goals are in alignment with your own core values. And last, if you have the means, support those organizations and communities of colors financially, because I mean, what's the saying? It takes money to make the world go round. It does, and these community organizations need your support in order for their efforts to move forward.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'll go next. I would say, don't be silent. It's easy to stand up for Black Lives Matter when it's the popular thing to do. It's easy when Black Lives Matter is a big topic, when our president is debating about it on live TV. But when the dust settles and people do everything they can to cling to any sense of normalcy, we will still be Black. And we are fighting a way to get we are fighting to get away from some of this normal. So don't be silent, speak up, have the hard conversations, have those conversations with your family, have those conversations with the people that you work with. Don't let any more time go by and let these injustices continue to happen. When you see somebody that is being oppressed or that is being done wrong, speak up for them. Choose humanity over any justification of racism and oppression, and especially over any party. Choose humanity. It's that simple. Make sure that all of these ideals and systemic racism and oppression that we're dealing with aren't duplicated. And it's all of our job. We can come together as a community, all of us, all races, and be one. But it's going to take people standing up for what's right. So don't be silent.
Oh, I love you guys. Yes, everything to what Naima and Jay said. And so I'll even add some more flavor to it. Stop stirring the pot in the ecosystem of lies. For instance, Day and I and Naima are all a part of what we believe Black Lives Matter is. To other people, it's an organization. To us, Black lives matter. I'm Black, I matter. So when you hear all of these rumors about Antifa or whatever, I don't even know what that is. Nobody from Antifa has been in touch with me, Day, or Naima. Nobody. We don't send money to the Democratic Party. We don't do anything like that. So what I would say to you, have the conversation. I remember there was a meme that I posted. What hurts the most is that you will believe someone on TV rather than believe me who's in your community. It is about our community. This is where the fight is. We can create laws here to protect us. It has nothing to do with the national stage. Local, local, local. So when you want to go, when people are passing that around at your little Thanksgiving dinner coming up here, talk to them and say, I actually know people in my community that are involved in the Black Lives Matter group that they formed here, and they have nothing to do with that. They have nothing to do with that. They actually want to just live. That's literally it, because you have influence around the people that you're surrounded with. So again, when you're with your family, so I have a lot of people who reach out to me and they want me to help them educate other people or something. And what I tell all of them is, so what I'm doing, because we all can't have everything on our plate, right? So I just encourage them and say, I know you see me as this influential person in this community and I have this platform, but you have the platform around your friends and family. That's really where influence is. So if you are speaking up for Day, Naima, and I, who are part of Black Lives Matter, you will be able to say the facts. They have nothing to do with that. They have nothing to do with what's going on in Portland. They have nothing to do with what's going on in New York. They have nothing to do with nothing. They are just trying to help Tri-Cities come together as a whole and understand that my Black life matters, period. That's it. So stick up and influence your family members, because I know Thanksgiving is coming up. Good luck with that.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. We all have influence. We all have the opportunity to have these and lead these conversations, even if they're not easy, but there's a value behind it that we're trying to support. So thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your hearts on that question. What is your vision for this community around race relations?
I'll go first this time. My vision for this community is a culturally competent community that has a zero tolerance on injustice, that is more concerned with people than political affiliations, one where our youth don't have to live the same exact lives and experience of the people that came before them, and one where my daughter, who's 1 right now, doesn't have to grow up and come home from school and tell me stories that are equal to the stories that I've experienced and gone through. That is my vision for this community, to be able to reach across the aisle, as people say, and have calm, knowledgeable conversations about race relations where we are understood and appreciated and respected. Right now, it's really hard to do that here in the Tri-Cities. Like they said, it is the South here. So that's my vision.
So for me, kind of to piggyback off of what Day said, I would love to see a community that embraces the beauty in diversity, an inclusive community where everyone, regardless of their differences, are welcomed, respected, valued, a community that recognizes barriers and understands that we do not all start at the same place, and therefore seeks to be equitable and ensure all members of the community are afforded access to opportunities and well-being. Overall, a culturally competent community, as Day mentioned, that not only understands, but also communicates and interacts effectively across differences.
All of what they said, and my vision would be that, and also stop telling us that we are not experiencing what we are experiencing. Just because you don't experience it doesn't mean it's not happening. If people get sexually assaulted every day, but just because I haven't been doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So stop saying that. I see that a lot, especially in the comment section on Facebook underneath the news channels, right? And so just listen, just sit down and listen to us. Again, this is a local thing. And stop saying, well, there's not a lot of you here. There aren't a lot of Black people here. But this is why we don't come, because we don't feel welcome, number one, and that's also why we leave. But even if there's only one Black person, make them feel welcome by teaching our history. We hear a lot. The attitude is, well, there's not a lot of you here, so why would we teach that? So otherwise, it's like slavery ended, Martin Luther King, he died. Okay, we're done. There's so much more. And understand that representation matters. Again, the filament, the stop sign, that red, green, and yellow thing was made by a Black man. First open heart surgery, Black man. So teach the history of our community so we can have pride in who we are as well. Representation matters is a psychological thing. So as Day said, it is about humanity over politics.
Some great words to live by, Reka. So the last question before we transition into a question and answer time that will be open to all of the speakers and panelists, and I've got a list here of questions that have come in. But just as we kind of wrap up this panel portion, how can people follow the work that you're doing and support it?
Okay, so I guess I'll go. So Tri-Cities Diversity Inclusion Council, we are on Facebook. If you go to our Facebook page, you will also find our email, our mailing address. What else? Let's see. If you're looking to get involved and you want to provide some monetary support, you can send donations. We have both a PayPal, which is paypal.me/TCDIC, or a Google Pay, Tri-Cities Council. But yeah, if you didn't get that information, feel free to contact us on Facebook, Tri-Cities Diversity Inclusion Council. You can send us a message, but pretty much that's the best way to get a hold of us.
And so I will say Day and I have been hosting, as we said earlier, the voter education candidate forums, which have been every Thursday. Dude, we started a while ago during the first local races in August, and it's continuing. So I was looking up who we had. Last Thursday, we had the state legislators in District 16, position 1 and 2. And then this Thursday, October 8th, actually, we'll have the next state legislators in District 8, position 1 and 2. And we've been doing that, like I said, pretty much every Thursday. And it'll end on that October 29th Thursday, and it starts at 7 p.m. and it'll be on the Power 99.1 Facebook page. So all you have to do is type that in your Facebook. It will pop up and be ready to join us on those Thursdays at 7 p.m. However, if you want to get a hold of me, don't friend request me. I don't know you, I won't add you, but you can hit me up on Instagram. I am just me, Reka, and that's R-E-K-A.
You can follow Black Lives Matter Coalition on Facebook. Our Facebook page is Black Lives Coalition Tri-Cities, or email us directly at blmcoalitiontc@gmail.com. The same goes for Urban Poet Society. You can find us on Facebook.
And just one more thing I want to add is that Dave, Reka will both be on the Tri-Cities Diversity Inclusion Council's Race Series first panel, like I mentioned earlier, and that's going to be aired on October 13th at 6 p.m. Again, that will be live Zoom on Facebook.
And just for all of the participants, if there's any information that was shared by our panelists that you weren't able to jot down or get, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to send all of that my way, and I can make sure that it gets into everyone's hands. So with that, we do have a couple of questions. I think the first one is actually directed at Bob and Robert. So question number 1 is about the 1943 defense contract requirement to hire a percentage of African Americans. The question is, when did that requirement go into effect?
So I'll jump in first, if that's okay, Robert. And
Go for it.
direct result of lobbying efforts by a civil rights activist named A. Philip Randolph, who lobbied FDR for equal pay and hiring of African Americans in the defense industry. And he convinced FDR to create an executive order to do that. And so that created the Fair Employment Practices Commission. And so it was the FEPC that was the organization that was ensuring that African Americans could work at defense industries at any of these sites and would be hired and paid the same rate.
Perfect. Okay. This question, I think, will have probably a fairly easy answer again for Bob and Robert. Is there a way to see the historical videos that were played as well as any other local interviews that are available around this topic?
Yes, there is. Hold on, if I put something in the chat, will everybody get it? Will the participants see it?
I might have to change some settings real quick. You can go ahead and give it a try.
So all the videos are at that the Hanford History Project has either done or collected around this topic. So everything you saw tonight plus more. We actually have a video. I interviewed Reka's father, Richie, and a lot of other folks. That's at hanfordhistory.com. Go into our collections, and then the collection has a long title. It's documenting African American history, so on, so on, so on. There's also, it's collection number 20, and that's in the chat there. And then feel free to browse. It's a Hanford History Project is our online archive for everything we've collected that we've digitized from the Hanford site.
Great, and I see the link got shared twice, so hopefully people can have access to that. I think we've got one more history related question. So someone says, I'm curious about the work of the faith communities in the Tri-Cities during the civil rights years, especially any connection with civil rights and the United Protestant Church Assembly in Richland. Very specific, but maybe if you have a response to at least the faith communities aspect, that might be helpful.
Well, definitely there were a number of Black churches that were very significant and important in civil rights efforts, and
Morning Star,
yeah.
Greater Faith, New Hope,
right?
Really, Morning Star especially.
And one of the first individuals during the war to really sort of challenge some of the segregation that had been put in place in Pasco was a man named Reverend Samuel Coleman. And so he fought efforts. The city was trying to get him to build his church in a certain place, and he refused and challenged them on that. So in addition to churches being directly involved, there were ministers and other leaders, faith leaders, who were involved as well.
Within Richland, I'm not sure to answer the specific part of the question. I'm not sure exactly about the UP church, but several of the Richland churches obviously were involved in that. Churches formed, and church membership formed a very crucial part of the civil rights struggle in American history. And several of the, many of the core members, which core was based in Richland and was much more, had much more, I think it was majority white, kind of white allies, and then the NAACP was more majority Black, headquartered in Pasco, but many of the core members were active in Christ the King, and I believe in the United Protestant Church as well. But Nyla Browns, a pretty outspoken white core member, her daughter Katie remembered that her mom was constantly challenging the Christ the Church leadership to take a stand supporting civil rights, and many times almost left the church due to what she felt was them not moving fast enough to support African American rights.
Okay, my back end moderators are working hard, and they are revising questions as we speak because you all covered so much territory. So I'm going to ask this question. So based on your knowledge and experience on the Tri-Cities, how can academic institutions in the area, WSU and CBC specifically, do better? And I think maybe, I know that our panelists have been working with the school districts around more inclusive curriculum. So maybe that's, you know, a starting place if anybody wants to chime in terms of higher education.
I think, for one, like you said, diversity and inclusion and equity training for staff members, so that we can have culturally competent staff working with students all across the board, from the collegiate level all the way down to elementary school, is a big deal right now. because our students need to feel safe and understood. And right now there's a giant gap in how that's happening. So that would be my biggest concern. And then also maybe hiring some equity consultants on all of your staff so that to ensure that a lot of these ideals aren't being duplicated and that erasure isn't happening and that Black people aren't being forgotten, and Latinos, especially in this community, aren't being forgotten and left out of conversations, to make sure that we're being sensitive to all of the topics and the things that are happening in current events. I think that is a great place to start.
And I'd like to echo what Day said, but in addition, add that it's important that as a organization that you all realize that these efforts can't be a one and done thing. You can't just have a training and say, okay, we've done the training and now that's it. Because the training alone is not going to correct anything. It's not going to create any change. It's important to understand that it's an ongoing process. So it's something that you're gonna need to take a look at all of your processes, all of your policies, your admission policies, your hiring practices, the back even to the topics in regards to what type of classes are provided. It's a wide range of things that need to be addressed, and it's important that when you do go about this work that it's strategic and that you're methodical in your process, but of course, just understanding that it's not a one and done deal.
And I would say even go above and beyond and try to recruit teachers, Black teachers, Asian teachers, from the BIPOC community, whoever, to come here and teach. And you need to ask yourself as a teacher, as a professor, do I actually care about all kids, or is it just white kids? When it comes to, again, representation matters. We all understand when it's about little girls seeing women, but then when you say a little Black girl needs to see a Black woman, it's, oh my God, that's racist. No, it's not. It's psychology, period. And so I would say that maybe WSU, CBC, even some of the high schools here, pay speakers to come, recruit teachers. Like there's Michael Eric Dyson you can bring here, Dr. Carr, who teaches at Howard University, the African American Studies, and bring them to present the history of Black history. And I know that we call it Black history and everybody's up in arms at the high schools around here about why are you teaching Black history? Because it's American history, period, dot, end of story. So when you're a teacher and you're in the education field, think about that.
Yeah, those are valuable insights, and I think definitely as someone who represents one of those institutions, great feedback for us to continue to think on in terms of how we can do better. So another question specifically about the voting guides. So someone says, would love to see more voting guides for the entire ticket, especially for local and nonpartisan candidates like judges. Can the panelists share online resources for progressive voters interested in racial and economic equity?
That's our voter education forum. I don't like, I mean, I won't say that. I do like what the League of Women Voters are doing and other people here who talk to the candidates. I literally actually was just talking to one today and she was asking me, how can I reach the young crowd? How can I reach the young crowd? And I said, the number one thing that you are doing wrong is you're speaking over their head. You are in the political world, so you know all of this political jargon. I'm 37 and I watched the League of Women Voters videos and I was like, what in the heck is going on? I was like, I need a dictionary. What are we talking about? And so when Day and I do the voter education forums, I hate using the word dumb it down, but that's what we do. Initially, it's about who are you? What is your heart? I get it. A judge, a Benton County commissioner should be nonpartisan, right? Yes. However, if you like me or not, that will determine how you spend the money and how you judge, because we're all human. You don't just get a badge, you don't just become a judge and a Benton County commissioner and they're like, okay, color is out the window, I don't think about anything, but where, you know, I want to get to the heart of these local candidates. And so that's what Day and I are doing in the voter education events. As far as the pamphlets that they send out from the audited's office, I can't help with that. But again, the voter education videos that we've been doing are still living on Power 99.1's Facebook page.
Perfect. Thanks for pointing us back to that resource, Reka. Okay, so how do you see the Washington State government working with local community-based organizations like the ones you are a part of to promote increased educational attainment for students of color?
I think you're gonna probably get crickets on this, no offense, but I haven't seen any government support.
Which is good for us all to be aware of. So the final question that I'm seeing right now is, let's see, what was the nature of the local movement to get rid of Kennewick's formal white-only policies? That would be back to Robert and Bob for your presentation.
Well, as we kind of, as we mentioned, it was a community movement. It involved people from Richland and Kennewick and Pasco, black and white, men and women, who challenged Kennewick city leaders, Kennewick businessmen, realtors, and just the general public by marching, by trying to pass fair housing ordinances. In fact, Bob should speak a little bit about that, because Tri-Cities passed a very early one in the state of Washington, and constant, and especially for the brave folks like John Slaughter and another gentleman whose name, Herman Rendetta Jones, some of the first people to move from Pasco to Kennewick, some of the first black residents of Kennewick, faced violence and intimidation that is straight out of the Klan playbook in the South, just for the act of trying to live in Kennewick. And so without those trailblazers and the support they received, who knows how long it would have taken.
Yeah, and just to follow up on what Robert said, it was a long process. It took a number of marches and demonstrations, a lot of lobbying efforts, and the involvement. There was a state organization called the Washington State Board Against Discrimination that, as a result of pressure from civil rights organizations here, came in number of investigations and made a lot of recommendations, and that played a role also in helping to change some of the policies in Kennewick as well. But it took a long time, absolutely.
Well, we are closing in on almost an hour and a half, so I want to be mindful of our guests' time as well as our participants. But this has just been an incredible opportunity for our community to learn. And so I want to say a big thank you to all of you who have joined. I do want to say, if there's any final thoughts or words you want to share, I don't want to miss that opportunity. So I'd love to extend that before I talk about logistics for our next community classroom events.
Yes, I would just like to add, when the question of when people are asking, what can I do to help? And I know we were talking about educating yourself. So I'm just going to give you some resources. I would watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix so you can see what we're up against on social media. That's why I don't add everybody I know. And also read the book Digital Minimalism. Understand that there is a power against us. And then also, while you're on Netflix, why don't you watch 13th? And how about When They See Us? I literally had a friend tell me she didn't know who John Lewis was. There's a documentary about John Lewis. It's either on Netflix or Amazon Prime. That is ridiculous. That's American history. Really, John Lewis? So watch that stuff. And there's, now on even Netflix, they have like a list of Black documentaries and stuff. They have a section that you can watch and just go down that rabbit hole so your eyes can be open to what we know is true about what we've experienced. And you may not, because you haven't experienced it and you don't know that it's true. So those are some of the things that you can watch. And then again, just go down the rabbit hole and also read White Fragility, and you'll learn on why it's hard for a lot of white people to speak about race.
I'll piggyback off of Reka a little bit. One, I just want to say thank you first for having us. Thank you to Mr. Franklin and Mr. Bauman. I actually saw your interview of my uncle, Bobby Sparks, and that was very awesome and insightful. But yeah, just to piggyback off of what Reka said, educate yourself, because you would be shocked, first of all, to learn how many Black people have to educate ourselves on our own history. A lot of what you're learning today from Mr. Franklin and Mr. Bauman, we've had to learn ourselves, or we've had to go to family members and they've had to sit us down and teach us. So it's nothing to Google, to pick up a book, to watch a documentary, to educate yourself on the history of this nation. Like it's been said numerous times, this is American history. And if you don't know where we've been, you have no idea why we're in the position we're in or where we're going. And that is a lot of the resistance we're facing is from the lack of education, like point blank period. People have no idea what they're talking about anymore or what has happened in this country. So please just educate yourself. Please, like I said, please stand up. Please don't be silent and keep having conversations like this. It doesn't have to be on WSU. It can be at your house. It can be at your school. It can be at your church. It can be wherever people are. That's where these conversations need to happen. So again, thank you to everyone. And yeah, follow us on Facebook.
And I have to echo everything both of them said. Both Reka and Day are dead on. One thing that I will add is that it's important to understand that the relationship is the conversation, right? The conversation is the relationship. So making sure, like Day said, have those conversations. Yes, they're difficult. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but that's normal. So understand that that discomfort that comes from having conversations about race, conversations about racial equity, conversations about any of those things that some people deem offensive or whatnot, it's normal to be uncomfortable. And so just embrace the discomfort, work through it, and that's going to be our avenue to change, having those conversations and embracing that discomfort. And again, thank you for having us. We appreciate having this opportunity. And again, if anybody is interested in reaching out to us, we're all on Facebook.
I just wanted to thank our three excellent panelists and Co-Presenter Bob. And I really want to thank Access and everyone that sat down to interview for our project and took the time to tell sometimes to really dredge up some memories and tell the truth and really to educate me and to educate everyone that this material would come into contact with and to enable me to, to put that out there and so we could share it together. And I just really appreciate everyone that was involved in this whole effort. So thank you.
And I will echo what Robert said. It's been an honor to be part of this panel, to be part of this event. Thank you again, Christine, for putting on. Thank you to everyone for participating. I tell my students all the time, if you don't know African-American history, you don't know American history. That's the way it is. And I also want to echo something that Reka mentioned earlier, right? The importance of the local history, local stories, right? You need to know the history of your local communities in order to understand the communities as they are now, right? So thanks again to everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and your ending comments are basically a perfect setup for our future community classroom events. And we plan to continue this conversation through this series. Reka, you mentioned kind of misinformation. Well, our next community classroom on October 22nd is called Digital Dissensus, Finding Truth in an Era of Misinformation. I might have gotten that off a little bit, but that is the snapshot of what the session will be on. And then our last session for this semester is going to be Dismantling Racism, the Game of Change. So we've got great events. That one's happening the 29th. So look out for continued promotion of these events. Again, a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you to all of our guests. We are so grateful for your time, your energy, your resources, and we're better for hearing your stories. So thank you.